Homicide report on the murder of Goro Abe case, number 024-1019. A incident date, October 24, 2008. Location, Nero Casino, 478, West Sampson Avenue. Victim, Goro Abe, male, age 27. Cause of death, single gunshot wound. Witnesses, none present at the time of discovery. Summary: at approximately 11:37 p.m., officers were dispatched to the scene of a reported shooting. Upon arrival, the victim, identified as Goro Abe, was found in the driver's seat of his Cadillac. The victim sustained a gunshot wound to his head, appearing to enter from the passenger seat. A Glock 19, identified as belonging to Michael Vercetti, was found at the scene. Evidence suggests the shooting may be gang-related. Vercetti was not at his home when we arrived for questioning. Phones rang, chairs creaked, and the TV buzzed with muted news. Most of the squad was buried in paperwork, or worse, scrolling their phones. Over in the corner, Detective Frank Delaney sat at his desk, fingers drumming against a police report, his eyes fixed on it like a puzzle he couldn't quite crack. "For Christ's sake, Delaney!" a voice barked from the other side of the room. Sergeant Harley, leaning back in his chair, his belly stretching his wrinkled shirt, let out a tired sigh. "Put the fucking report down. You're wasting time with this." His fingers moved up to the pimple on his forehead that he'd been scratching at for minutes. This time it popped, oozing down to his brow. Delaney looked up, unfazed by Harley's indifference to the job. He pushed the paper away slightly, but his eyes stayed glued to it. "I can't help but think we're missing something here," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "The gun. Why was it left behind?" Delaney had been a loyal member of the force for the better of 2 decades at this point, always in line with the rest of the force, but he didn't feel they were right this time. Harley rolled his eyes and stood up, grabbing his cup of stale coffee off the desk. He took a slow, deliberate sip before answering. "Because this low-level fall guy isn't used to killing," Harley shot back, his coffee-stained teeth doing little to protect the room from his breath as they bared. Greaseball plays with his joystick peering through Iraqi windows for 3 years, then discharged. Even they know he's not worth a gram of shit. Fucker sat in his chair, safe and sound in the States, while some of us actually risked it all out there. So now he finally gets an itch for blood and takes it out on some wannabe Yakuza. Delaney's eyes flicked up, narrowing. He thought back to his time in Iraq, wishing he could have just stayed in a chair. He could tell Harley felt the same resentment. There were many times he caught Harley in a state of panic thinking back on their time in the war. And yet, we're expected to believe this same greaseball pulls off a clean hit but leaves the weapon? Something doesn't add up, Harley. We haven't even seen Vercetti since. Harley grunted, pacing lazily. "You're looking for ghosts, Frank. Gang hits like this? They don't have to make sense. Some moron probably thought he'd get more respect if he popped around in some poor bastard's head. Happens all the time." Delaney leaned back, running a hand through his salt and pepper hair, eyes distant. "But the gun's common shit, and this guy's a vet. If he was going for a gang-style execution, why not something louder, flashier?" "You're overthinking it, man," Harley groaned, slapping Delaney on the shoulder. "Move on. Go home. Get some cookies with the wife, and maybe if we are lucky, watch some TV that isn't Columbo for once. This ain't some liberal poor guy steals a can of corn shit. It's a cut-and-dry gangland hit." But Delaney wasn't convinced. His forehead tensed, and the lines that outlined his years in the force created borders between patches of worn skin. "Go ahead and file it under gang violence if you want, Harley," Delaney said, leaning forward. "But I'm telling you, there's more to this than we're seeing." Harley, already halfway across the room, gave a dismissive wave. "Good luck with that, Sherlock. Just don't waste too much time chasing your own tail." Delaney glanced back at the report, his fingers tracing the photo of the bullet hole left in the Cadillac's front fender. Why would Vercetti shoot the car, his face burrowing into itself as he strokes his chin with his other hand? Before he could delve further, a shadow fell over his desk. Captain Hendricks stood there, arms crossed, his thick mustache twitching with irritation. He was a large man who had as much patience for tough cases as his apprentice Harley. "Delaney, enough," Hendricks grumbled, his voice low but firm. "Drop the damn case. It's open and shut. I'm giving it to Harley so he can finish it." Delaney met Hendricks' gaze but kept silent. His fingers drummed lightly on the file, reluctant to release it. "I know how you get when something doesn't sit right with you, Frank," the captain continued, leaning in a little. "But we don't have time for dead ends. You've got more important cases on your desk. I need you to work on the Santos case. I mean, a liquor store robbery that ends in 3 gangbangers dead is much more interesting than this, so close this one up. I'm not asking." Delaney sighed and leaned back, feigning defeat. "Yeah, fine, Captain," he muttered, reluctantly pushing the file forward. "I'll file it under gang violence with the others." Satisfied, Hendricks gave a nod and turned away. Delaney watched him lumber back to his office, the door clicking shut behind him. For a moment, Delaney just stared at the file. Then, moving his head laterally to be sure no unwanted eyes were on him, he slowly slid it off his desk and slipped it into his briefcase. Grabbing his jacket, Delaney stood up, slinging his briefcase over his shoulder. He exited the precinct, the cool fall air hitting his face with a crisp chill as he stepped out onto the sidewalk. The precinct lights flickered behind him, casting long shadows. He was sweating, and his eyes were frantic. He never disobeyed his captain before. He feared the repercussions of pursuing this. It was his job to solve cases like these, but recently it stopped feeling that way. Everyone wants a simple answer, something they can present to the mayor as a reason for their funding. When you close a case, you can celebrate, pat each other on the back, and move to the next one. This case should be no different. Some Italian wanted to make himself Scarface, and a Japanese victim who was better off dead than alive. He knew he needed to find Vercetti. As he walked toward his car, something caught his eye. A black sedan idling a block down the street. He stopped in his tracks, narrowing his eyes. The moment he turned to face it fully, the car's engine roared to life, and it peeled out, tires screeching as it sped down the street. Delaney's heart pounded. He watched as the sedan disappeared around the corner, but not before catching a glimpse of a figure in the passenger seat. Whoever they were in a hurry. Too much of a hurry for Frank's liking. Delaney enters his squad car and makes sure not to turn his radio on. He puts the car in drive and heads down the freshly paved road. Delaney was never a fan of the Nero Casino. Its pillars didn't deceive him. The story goes it replaced an old warehouse old gangsters like Capone and Johnny Vive played poker. Those mob ties never really went away. In the early 90s, a shootout at a bar near the warehouse caused the property value to sink. Nero Casino Group was able to buy the real estate for pennies on the dime, so houses were destroyed, bars were paved over, and the warehouse was torn down. With the location being near the river, just down 3 miles downstream from Busch Stadium, it was a perfect location for a pretty skyline. Delaney wasn't a man skylines impressed. Its parking lot, 3 blocks worth, in his eyes certainly wasn't worth a skyline. The murder happened in the back corner of the lot. A chalk outline of the car was still on the asphalt. Next to a vomit stain, a chalk outline of Vercetti's Glock remained. Delaney squinted at the chalk outline of the car, mentally tracing the scenario. As his eyes shifted across the asphalt, he noticed something unusual, a series of scuff marks on the ground leading away from the car, almost hidden beneath a layer of dirt. Kneeling down, he brushed the grime away, revealing a distinct pattern. Someone had been dragged here, and the soles of their shoes left a yellow mark leading perpendicular to the parking lanes. He followed the patterns to a car near the back middle of the parking lot. At the end of the trail, a small puddle of dried crimson rested. Delaney's gaze sharpened, taking in every detail. He focused on the evidence before him, piecing together the events of the night. Just then, he noticed a glint in the distant sky, and smirk crept across his face. As he straightened up, Delaney pulled out his radio, keeping his voice measured as he contacted Hendricks. "Captain, I found some scuff marks leading away from the car, and there's a small puddle of dried blood at the end of the trail. I need to check the security cameras for any footage." Hendrix's response crackled through the radio, laced with frustration. "Delaney, you're not on this case anymore. I can't have you digging into this." Delaney paused. "But, Captain, this could lead us to something important." "Sometimes it's best to let sleeping dogs lie, Frank," Hendricks replied, his tone growing sharper. "Focus on your assignment, damn it. Harley's got this handled." Delaney pressed his lips together, feeling the weight of the captain's dismissal. He stood with his mouth to the radio, not saying things for a moment.